Today on the Whatsoever Things show, the guys discuss the resurrection of Jesus. Was it real? What do the skeptics say about it? And I'm going to let you finish, but the resurrection was the greatest event of all time. Of all time. It's another great episode, so get ready. Here we go. Well, hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Whatsoever Things show, a podcast designed to stimulate your mind, tickle your funny bone, and encourage your faith.
Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things.
This is episode 3 of the Whatsoever Things show. Swoon, not spoon.
Welcome to the Whatsoever Things podcast. Thank you for joining us again. Got here to my left, I've got Thomas Hickman.
Yo! I'm just kidding.
Directly across the table.
I wanted to do that every time.
On the south end zone of the field, for me, Pastor Daniel. Got Josh Hamblen to my right.
I got nothing cool to say.
Neither do I, don't worry.
And then special returning guest, Mr. Mike Hamblen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're coming at you today from a new location. You're going to hear some echo in the background, but on the string budget we work on, we just find a space we can fit in. So that's where we are today. So I want to thank you again. Today we're going to try to tackle Easter and kind of look at Easter in maybe one or two ways. It's the story of the resurrection. With my faith is built on two things: the resurrection of Jesus and the ability, as Elijah did, to place a curse on somebody for picking on me for having a bald head.
That's true.
If both of those stay true, my faith is solid.
I stay clear of you just in case. I don't want to accidentally get cursed.
So with that, we're going to talk about Easter. And this Easter in the year 2021 is going to be more different than in any time in the past. Even more different than 2020 when Easter was more different than any time in the past. Mike, can you think of an Easter, the way this world is operating today and where we are sitting as a civilization today?
Easter 1611 was pretty rough. You remember that one?
Well, a lot of things have changed. You know, we have the coronavirus, of course, is a big part of that. But generally speaking, there's a lot of strife out there between political parties, a lot of strife between people in general, and so many different factions in this country alone and worldwide. A lot of disrupting things and factions that are striving with each other. So we have a lot of strife in the world today, I would say.
And how are we going to come out of this COVID, but this Easter? If you think about the world we live in today, our government, and this is a little political rant.
Mike, be careful.
Our government just passed a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, which less than whatever percent goes to COVID. But this COVID relief bill, not only does it pay very few people money, but this is the first funding relief bill that did not use this funding bill. Over $800 million goes to fund abortions in the United States. That was the rush of getting this COVID bill out.
Is it passed completely? Because what I read was it passed the Senate, but it's got to go back to the House.
Yeah, but it will.
It's been signed, I thought.
The House.
It will.
Well, by the time these people listen to it, it'll have
it would have passed probably.
Yeah. But there's an amendment that they use called the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits funding bills from utilizing any of the funding to go towards abortions. And our government purposely took that amendment out from within this bill. It's always in the bills. And so we're just in a time in 2021 like, potentially we've never seen. So how are we going to come out? How are we going to come out of this COVID? How, as Christians, are we going to use Easter and the resurrection to tell our story, our First Amendment right?
Yeah, I guess that Hyde Amendment, I think Henry Hyde passed that many years ago. He got it through Congress and got it through the Senate. And at that time, they were saying that no abortions can be performed with taxpayer funds or taxpayer money of any kind. And that amendment passed and stood strong for many years. But from what I understand, from what you're saying, they've taken it out. I guess
There was out of the Senate, it was 49 to 50 voted. I guess the Alaskan senator had to fly home for a funeral, but we know the vice president would have made the tiebreaker vote anyways. And so these times are just like the times of the of Easter, of the crucifixion or resurrection. The disciples, you could characterize them as it's a time of denial and betrayal. They fell asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane. They Peter betrayed Jesus, ran. They abandoned him. It was a time of confusion, just like now, time of confusion. Wear double mask. Now they're saying you don't have to wear a mask if you have the shot, the COVID shot.
Well, I know for sure their world was turned upside down. Everything the disciples were expecting to happen, like the opposite happened. And then again and again, it was just confusion. You're right. But we talk about the Resurrection Sunday. This is like we said it before. This is the center of Christianity. Everything really hinges on this: Jesus' resurrection from the dead. I think Paul says, I don't know, is it in 1 Corinthians he says it, or he says if the resurrection didn't happen, we are most people to be pitied. You should have pity on us because we're following something that didn't happen, but it did happen. And I think that's, I don't know. It seems like in these days there's a lot of skepticism towards the resurrection of Christ, whereas before it was kind of accepted, I think, pretty generally in the last 1,000 years or so. But we're kind of in an age of skepticism about it, and I think being clear on what's going on, what it is, what we actually believe, I think is important. Right.
I mean, you think about every denomination, every person that is a quote unquote pastor, they're preaching the goodness and the good news. And even if they don't necessarily agree with everything in the Bible, if they're not preaching the resurrection, then that means it's a lie, and preachers are a liar, and that people that believe that's blasphemy against God if you say God did something that he did not do.
Yeah. There are some, I think, kind of spiritualists or Christian spiritualists, or I don't know, where they say that Jesus didn't physically raise from the dead, but he spiritually raised from the dead. And it was all the disciples and all the people had Jesus experiences. And I think they're trying to play towards the naturalism crowd, more. I think, wasn't there the Jesus movement or something that happened? The Jesus seminar or something, where the leader of that group, he said something like that, I think.
Well, you guys have probably heard of the shroud, I guess.
Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, Shroud of Turin. And this shroud, now the Catholic Church has had it for centuries and centuries, so forth. And of course it got damaged by fire a time or two. But I guess I forget what decade it was. I'm thinking the 1980s. They let the shroud out for scientists to look at, to examine it, and to see what that thing. And they found a lot of things. They found pollen there from the Middle East. They found all kinds of things in that shroud. And of course, there was an image on the shroud, on this piece of cloth. And they said that image was brought about by intense radiation. Intense radiation had made this image get onto this cloth. And of course, we know that Jesus was raised from the dead by great power, and it was an earthquake and so forth, and great power was going on there. So, I think the fact that he was physically raised from the dead is absolutely true. And whether you believe in the shroud or not, I don't know. It's just kind of a toss up. But I believe that this thing did happen, and the Bible accounts are right. Of course, the angel appearing right there. And of course the guards that were watching over the grave at the time, they became as dead men. They were afraid of this angel that they saw. That looked like appearance was like a lightning, walking around like a lightning. So these boys, they seen something they'd never seen before. And they were scared to death, and they took off running. Mm-hmm. But, I think this is no doubt that he absolutely did raise from the dead, and no question about it. And there's many testimonies to this fact, and I suppose there's some ancient writings to this fact too. But Josephus was a historian at the time, and he may have recorded some of these things. But he talked to many people, I think, that were somewhat witnesses to this thing. But it's interesting that we're talking about this because it is a question that there's many Christians in the world today. Of course, there's other religious beliefs. You have the Muslims, you have the Buddhists, you have a lot of different groups. But the Christian belief of Jesus Christ coming from the being raised from the dead is absolutely true, no question about it. I guess that's about all I have to say about that right now. I was said enough, but it's a fact. But go ahead.
Yes, the Bible provides a lot of authoritative evidence on the resurrection, and there's logic involved with it as well.
Yeah. So as far as the story of Jesus dying and rising from the dead, there are people who are New Testament critics, or New Testament. What are they? Maybe it is New
Skeptics.
No, I think it's New Testament criticism critics. I think is what they're called. Anyways, the famous one is Bart Ehrman, who kind of hits this stuff, and these are people who are very learned, they're professional, but they will even look at the scriptures and say, yeah, the disciples believed that Jesus had rose from the dead. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. And so even if they disagree that Jesus rose from the dead, they can at least say, yeah, but it's pretty clear with the writings of the New Testament that the disciples believed that he did. And so the problem I think people have today is that, well, people don't come back from the dead. If somebody came to you and said, somebody came back from the dead, they were clearly dead and they came back and then they ascended into heaven and they told you this story, on the surface, no, you shouldn't really believe a story like that. That's not normal. But in this case, the reason Christians believe it is, well, there's information, and we're given a lot of information. And the more information you find on this, the more you read through the Gospels and then into Acts, the more you realize it gets harder and harder to refute. And I think that's the problem for non-believers. It gets to be pretty hard to refute the evidence of the resurrection. And so, like Paul said, it stands and falls on this, whether it's true or not. And we can get into it as the show goes on, but it seems to be true. I mean,
and the disciples were willing to die for Jesus after the resurrection.
Yeah.
They betrayed him, they denied him, they abandoned him leading up to it.
Yeah.
And they were willing to die for him. And the Bible says he taught and met and walked and ate with over 300 people.
Yeah.
That is physical witnesses. And that testimony is the strongest testimony you have in law, because there's people that could say, I was there. They could testify that it did or did not happen. And there is no evidence that
I think
someone said that, no, I was there and it did not happen.
Right.
It's like either Josephus or Joseph of Arimaeus, they found no evidence that he was an actual person until they found a plaque not many years ago that had the name
of Joseph of Arimathea.
Yeah, Joseph of Arimathea.
I think I did see that. So I guess really before we get too far into this, I think we need to say something about miracles in general. So if you're kind of a skeptical-minded person, and some people don't have these problems at all, by the way. Misty, she has no problems with any kind of miracle claim or anything like that. She's heart-minded, where people like me have a hard time with it, and we want to dig in. We want to know what's true and what's the case. And with miracles, you get to we all have this thing called a normalcy bias. Everyone walks around with these things. And the older you are, the more you have it. Because the more experiences you've had in life, you know what patterns happen and what things are normal and what things aren't normal. And people coming back from the dead is not a thing that is normal that happens on a pattern like that.
Jesus, not dead after 3 days, but
yeah.
People that have heart attacks or whatever.
Well, the way Jesus came back, came back, that's not normal.
Yeah.
And so if your only thing is to say, well, since that's not normal, that's not a pattern I've seen in my life, therefore I'm going to reject it, you're actually committing a fallacy. You can't really discover the truth if you just hold everything to a normalcy bias. Just trying to think of an example of this. Well, Jesus had the children come to him, and remember, he told the disciples, don't hinder the children from coming to me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And he says, unless you become like this little child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think what Jesus is saying here is, some people see this as saying he's telling you to become naive, like his kids are naive. But I don't think that's what he's saying. I think Jesus is saying, you are walking around with your arms folded, thinking you know how reality works, how the real world is, and you have no idea how it is. And just like these little kids have no idea how the real world is, that's what you have to become. You have to be able to suspend your normalcy bias every so often if you want to discover truth. It's a tool that you have to put in the toolbox if you're looking for truth. And this goes in every field of study or anything like that. You can look at, if scientists want to discover something new, they have to go against the grain of what seems normal. You can take, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something. What's that? Quantum entanglement or something like that. That doesn't seem normal.
Ooh.
You know what I mean? If you look into
Thomas, you and I were just talking about that the
Yes,
other day.
we were.
It doesn't seem normal that a
over a
particle
spot of tea.
20 miles away reacts to a particle over here at the same time. You know, that doesn't make sense. You shouldn't. But because they were looking for something out of the ordinary, they suspended their normalcy bias and they discovered truth. They discovered this theory, at least. And so that's what we have to do. We could get into miracles, a whole podcast about it, really. But there are things that happen even in our world today that are miraculous, but because they happen on a constant basis, we call them normal. You could say a tree, you could plant a tree in the ground and it pulls up water and phosphorus and potassium and nitrogen, out of the ground. But most of the material from a tree comes out of the air. It pulls it out of the carbon in the air. And so you could look at a tree and say, this 100-year-old oak tree, 10 tons, appeared over time out of thin air. And you could say that sounds pretty miraculous. Well, we don't say it's miraculous because it happens all the time.
It's repeated and repeated.
Yeah, and
repeated.
you could say about a lot of things. But I think that's the first step. Right. You have to be able to suspend normalcy bias. Now that you've done that, you can discover truth. And that's where we got to start.
I just like to think, especially in these times we are, these disciples, what they were going through. They were a mess just like we are. Their lives were busy. They gave up family. They gave up their job. They weren't the most, at least, well, Luke was. He was a doctor, but the most educated. They weren't the high priest in their church, and to go through this time from Jesus sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane to hearing him, watching him be crucified.
One nervous dude right there, sweating blood.
Yeah. And that goes in against one of the theories. His blood pressure was low from sweating blood in Gethsemane, and then going through the full crucifixion.
Yeah, and to kind of get your mind into their heads for back then, the Second Temple Judaism. After Solomon built the first temple 100 or 1000 BC, and then they went into captivity, and then Persia took over, and then the Persian king let them come back and build another temple. And from then on, they started to become very, very conservative religious people. And two groups kind of sprung up from that. You had the Pharisaical group, and then you had the Sadducees. And the Pharisees took the Old Testament, they took the writings of the prophet, and they came to understand that they're speaking of a messianic ruler who is going to rule, and also that there's going to be a resurrection from the dead, that the people who had died, now this was just Jews, this is what they're thinking, not the whole world, just Jews who would rise from the dead, and then he would rule with these resurrected people. And so that's what they're thinking. The Sadducees, by the way, did not believe that. They only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. And that's how you can remember they're Sadducees because they don't believe in the prophets. They're sad, you see. That's Amanda Hahn taught me that. I never forgot it.
Daniel looks extremely proud.
But that's what they're thinking. They're thinking Jesus is going to reign, and the resurrection of the dead is going to happen after that. And when Lazarus dies, and Mary tells Jesus, Jesus says, I'm going to raise him from the dead. And Mary's like, well, I know, Lord, he's going to be raised from the dead in the resurrection. And Jesus says, no, Mary, you don't understand. I'm the resurrection. I'm going to do this. And Jesus is the first fruit of that. And the disciples had no idea that was coming. They had no idea that Jesus, even though he plainly told them throughout the Gospels that, they're going to kill me, or at least they're going to try to kill me, but, I can't die for very long. But that was the first fruits of the resurrection, our first fruit of all of that. And then it all came to him. I think in the upper room, it really, the Holy Spirit really showed him.
Well, the Easter and the resurrection is central to our faith. And some say it is the most well-attested event in history. And it has always stood the testing and the evidence. And
so, I guess we should probably mention some of the criticisms.
Yes. Let me start out though. I don't want to forget to say this. So, and I texted to you all. It was Mark. It's Mark 15:15, and this is with Pilate, and Barnabas and Jesus are in front, and he has to decide who is going to be crucified. And Pilate wants to pick Barabbas.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say Barnabas? Barabbas. Yeah, Barabbas. And he went with the crowd and picked Jesus.
Yeah.
And that Mark 15:15. And it says, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them.
Yeah.
He had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. And so I'm using the wanting to satisfy the crowd.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Do we want to satisfy the crowd or hold up to our faith? Thomas?
I think as humans, we, for whatever reason, we want to satisfy the crowd. You know what I mean? We don't want to stand out because it's harder that way. If you stand out, if you satisfy the crowd and the people around you are happy, life's easier that way.
Something that's interesting about Barabbas that when you brought that up made me think, he was in his jail cell fixing to be crucified. He knew it was coming. And then the jail cell was opened and they told him, Barabbas, you're free to go. And this guy started a rebellion against Rome. I mean, he was Rome's enemy. And he's walking out of his jail cell. And you can almost picture him looking over his shoulder and there's crosses on the hill. And he's like, I don't know who that guy in the middle is, but he has taken my place. I should have been on that cross. And now here I am walking out of prison. And I think that is the Christian message, Here we are free from eternal damnation, really, from just torment. And that guy in the middle took our spot. And I think, I know you were talking about satisfying the crowd and stuff, but that just came to me like, man, we're so lucky. We're so fortunate to have a Savior like Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah, I think satisfying the crowd, that's something that always happens many times. I think Pilate in that situation there at first, he wanted to let Jesus go. So I see no reason to have this man punished. He don't seem to be, and he should have no charges against him. I don't see anything wrong with him. But they kept on him and they kept getting louder and louder and making charges about Caesar. He's no friend of Caesar's you're no friend of Caesar's if you don't have him executed, and so forth and so on. So Pilate he gave into the pressure of the crowd, and I think that can happen in anybody's life. Politicians are that way, and of course, us as individuals can be that way too. We can get into a spot where everybody's lined up against us, saying the opposite of what we're trying to say, trying to get the point across. And sometimes we have to go against the grain, and it's not a happy situation to be in, but sometimes it has to be done. And but Pilate, he gave in. Of course, we know also in the Bible that with John the Baptist, with King Herod there, I guess Herod gave in to the guests that were with him, because what's her name, Salome, was it? Gave that dance and everything. But he gave in to pressure too. Mm-hmm. He had people staring at him. You going to stick with your promise or what? He done made the promise. He just didn't give in to it.
Kind of brings up Peter too. Peter kind of gave in. They said, "Weren't you with him?" And He's like, "No, it wasn't me."
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in.
I know. I don't blame Peter. I mean, that's a tough one. I don't want to be stuck on a cross.
All right, Thomas, what do you got for us?
So we, I kind of thought it'd be a good idea. I don't even know if good idea is the right word, but it might be interesting if one of us, and we just decided it would be me, plays the devil's advocate here. So, try to question why the resurrection, why it's important, and or did it happen. And there's three main theories as to refute it, I guess might be the right word. And I guess the first one would be the swoon theory, where Jesus didn't die. He just passed out. Swoon, not spoon, Josh.
I thought it was,
Josh is getting hungry.
I thought it was a spoon theory.
The swoon theory, where Jesus didn't die. He just he had passed out from all of his injuries and the torment he had, and so they just took him away. And then after 3 days, he was kind of recuperated, and then came up and was walking around. And that's where he resurrected. He died. So what do you have to say about that, Josh?
What do you think, Dad?
Oh, he's gonna pass the buck.
Well, really, if you look at all the evidence and all the scriptures and all the things that are written about it, and a certain amount of archaeological evidence to go along with it too, I believe. You have to believe that he was raised from the dead. Another thing I was thinking about was those soldiers who were guarding the tomb.
Yeah.
When they went back to talk to the high priest, they said, "Yeah, this angel showed up. I guess he was an angel, looked like lightning. We don't know what he was, And the stone was rolled back, and we just got out of there. But he says, I tell you what." You go back to Pilate and don't say anything about it. And if the word comes back, if you have any trouble about this thing, we'll talk. We'll help you out of it. And here's some money to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody.
How much money are we talking here?
And also, this thing is also circulated throughout the Jews for quite a long time, for quite a period of time. It mentions that in the Bible as well. So the Jews and the Israelites knew about this thing. I mean, it was well known at the time. Even though the soldiers wouldn't say anything, a lot of people were talking about it. It was too big an incident not to talk about.
I think these Romans knew how to kill people. Like
Well,
they
They were professional.
yeah,
They were centurions, weren't they?
Yeah.
Which was, they were like our special forces. They're the most highly trained ones there.
They've crucified people
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah.
And if you rebelled against Rome, it was a capital punishment, and you was crucifixion that happened. And with Jesus' crucifixion, which is unique from some of the other ones, is he was flogged first. He was whipped first. And Pilate did that, didn't maybe that'll get the crowd to satisfy the crowd. And they would flog you to the point of death, and then it would take you weeks and months to recover just from a flogging like that. And the fact that Jesus recovered in 3 days, if he didn't die, that's interesting. Plus, when he's on the cross, he's watched by these Roman soldiers, and they're making sure he dies. And as it comes time, they told him, to break the legs of the prisoners, of the people on the cross. They go to Jesus. They see he's already dead. They recognize death. And to even push the matter further, they shove a spear in his side. And he doesn't.
Not just in it. It's in his ribs, into his lungs.
Yeah.
If you
and he
puncture
didn't
your lungs,
flinch. There's
you're
nothing
gone.
there. So he was dead.
Yeah.
There's no coming back from that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the pass out theory you can start from the Garden of Gethsemane when he sweats blood. And the distance he walked from Gethsemane to the eventual crucifixion site, where he was flogged along the way and beaten and had already lost blood.
Yeah, he was almost dead when they put him on the cross.
From then and to have the strength enough to walk around for 30 plus days and eat.
Yeah, that's
is
unrealistic.
Really unrealistic.
Nobody being flogged like that could do it. Nobody being crucified, if they survived, could do it 3 days later.
Much less move the stone after all that happened. Roll the stone out of the way and walk
get
out.
Yeah.
And so
I remember years ago when Joe was the youth pastor here, he had done a sermon one night for us where he was talking about Jesus on the cross and how the way you're up there, you can't, it's hard, it's almost impossible to breathe. So he's having to lift himself up to take a breath and then go back down and then back up. And just every time that plays in my mind, that's heartbreaking. Just to take a breath, something you just automatically do.
Yeah.
And you got to go through all that pain just to take a breath.
I guess on a smaller note, they knocked him around, pushed him around, kicked him around down this Della de Rosa, I guess the way to the cross. They kicked him around, booted him around, pulled his beard out, called him all kinds of names, bad-mouthed him all the way down the line. He took a lot of verbal abuse and not to mention physical abuse. They slapped him around, knocked him around. I know they did, and tripped him up. They did all kinds of things on that trip down. In fact, he got to where he couldn't even carry the cross. You know the story. He kind of fell down, and they grabbed that other fellow to pick it up and take it there.
Simon, I think
It was a. Anyway, he picked that thing. They told him to carry it. He carried it on down there for him. But it was a tremendous physical thing. And he didn't last too long once he got on the cross. You know, Pilate was kind of surprised when he heard. Pilate was surprised when he heard that he was already dead. He was quite shocked. He thought he'd lasted a little longer than that, but they said the prisoner was already dead. That was the word that he got.
Yeah.
So, but it was a very traumatic thing he went through. Very, very, very traumatic.
Yeah, and a lot of that was pushed to demoralize his followers too. You know, we kind of look at Jesus on the cross nowadays, and it's like this, right before glory happens. But really, it was a bad sight. I mean, they crucified people naked, and you went to the bathroom up there, and it was rough.
Mm-hmm.
It was to demoralize his followers. Nobody would be proud of that. And here, it's funny, we wear crosses on our necks and we put them in our yards and stuff. But it was very demoralizing back then, at a different time. But yeah, I think for that one, he's clearly dead. There's no question about that.
Okay. So what about the hallucination theory, which says that after Jesus had died and was buried in the tomb, that the people that say they have firsthand sightings of him, that they were all just hallucinating?
Tough to have a group of people all hallucinate at the same time for the same amount of time for the number of days they were with Jesus, and to all evenly hallucinate
The same exact things.
the exact same things.
Yeah. So there. I guess there's audible hallucinations. You can hear noises that aren't there, and I guess that happens. And then there's visual hallucinations that happen sometimes, but it's extremely rare for one person to have an audio and a visual hallucination at the same time. They happen, but they're rare from what I hear. But for an entire group to have audio and visual hallucinations of the same thing at the same time, and we're talking hundreds. Jesus appeared to hundreds of people.
Wasn't it 500 that he appeared to?
It's
spoken from him?
300?
Well over 300.
Was it?
Yeah, so I don't see how that holds any water at all. And I think the story that and we're not trying to set up straw man arguments here, but I think the story they try to set up is that it's they were so grief stricken that they would see somebody in the distance and that that must be him, that's Jesus, And for everybody to hallucinate that doesn't happen. Again, the disciples weren't expecting him to rise from the dead. You have to remember this is not what their religion was telling them.
Yeah,
this was something new that happened.
If all of them acted the way they did before the crucifixion, they're denying him, they're running away, the whole thing. They obviously were not expecting him to. If they were expecting him to rise 3 days later, they would not have denied him. They would not have run away from him. You know what I'm saying? That just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of details also in the gospel, written in the Gospels about him reappearing to his disciples and so forth. The doors were all locked, and all of a sudden he shows up in the middle of them. How to get in with the doors being locked. And also, he told, I think it was Thomas, they call him Doubting Thomas, but he told Thomas, he said, come here, Thomas. He said, I want you to put your fingers in my, the nail holes in my wrists, and also put your hand in my side, make sure it's me. And also, I want you to give me a piece of fish to eat. Give me a piece of broiled fish. So they gave him a piece of fish to eat. And he was in the flesh, standing right there among the people. He was there. And, of course, the wounds were there where he'd gone through the crucifixion.
And apparently he was hungry.
Yeah, and he was hungry and wanted some food. And the evidence of him eating the food like any person would. Yeah, those are pretty positive things right there, pretty powerful things to think about. As
hallucination wouldn't need food. So.
No, that's right. It takes quite a hallucination to do that. And
all right, so now we go to the conspiracy theory, where they say the body of Jesus was stolen and hid. What do you think about that, Mr. Mike?
Oh, well, it takes some doing to hide the body because, we know it was put in the tomb. And of course, the huge stone was rolled in front of it. It's going to take a lot of guys.
It takes several people, yeah.
It's going to take a lot of guys to move that thing. Of course, it's possible. They could have moved it, I suppose. But hiding it and the word getting out, the word always gets out. You got 4 or 5 guys that have done something like that. Somebody's going to say something to the girlfriend or something. The word's going to get back. Before you know it, they're going to find out where his body is, where it's buried, or where it's being hidden. And a secret would not have lasted long, I think, as far as hiding the body went. But yeah, no, it is a theory that I suppose they have. But
yeah, I don't think it holds much water with me, because if before he was crucified, they're denying him, and then 3 days later they hide his body, and then they're so adamant that he rose that they were killed for it.
Yeah.
They were tortured.
They took it all the way to the grave.
Yeah, a couple of days ago, they're like, oh, no, we don't know who that guy is. Now all of a sudden they're hiding his body, and they're like, oh, yeah, you can kill us over it. Like, it just doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, nobody who's sane would. Right. I mean, you can make up a fake story. People do that, I'm sure. But nobody's going to be, when you're threatened to be boiled in oil over it, you might say, okay, we made it up.
Yeah.
But these guys, I mean, read Fox's Book of Martyrs. There's a lot of stories in there where people who seen Jesus resurrected from the dead, seen him, who went to the grave in terrible, terrible ways. And they did not say that they wouldn't see it. I think that just doesn't fit with someone who's going to make it up. Also, it's a weird thing to make up. Imagine the conversation that's happening when they're all gathered together. They're like, hey, we'll just take his body and we'll pretend he rose from the dead, and we'll all make, it's like you have to get everyone to agree to that. It sounds crazy. This is something no one's expecting to happen. They're so distraught and so mixed up. They don't know what's happening. They see Jesus, and even when they see him, they're like, that can't be Jesus. Was that Jesus? They even have a hard time recognizing him, because in their head, they're like, no, he's gone. Mm-hmm. But here he is.
And which of the disciples was it? Stephen refused to be crucified and was crucified upside down.
Peter, yeah. Peter, now that's like according to church traditions and stuff. So this is all extra biblical for how they all were are killed. But Peter, was crucified upside down, as the story goes.
And you have, as Mike said, it's hard for people to collaborate and not ever tell somebody. Hey, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
This
is a secret.
And the fact that 300 people saw, and the fact that he taught and fellowshiped with them for over 30 days, and then all the disciples still didn't go out in public. Really, it impacted them so much. They were like, "This is it." They were in the room like, "Okay," in a war room, getting ready to say that we're dispersing after this. And
I think two of them were like, well, I'm going fishing. I'm going back to my old life.
That's my answer to everything.
And it's like, this is over. I'm going back to my old life. And as they're fishing, they see, Jesus on the shore. And they're like, could that be? And he says, throw your nets on the other side, which is something he had already done with them. Mm-hmm. And they're like, let's try it. And they try it and it works. Like, yeah, that's Jesus. And they get there and Jesus has already got a fire cooked and he's got fish on the fire. And it's just awesome story there. Just, hey, come have some fish. Bring some of the ones you caught. Mm-hmm. The other thing about stealing his body too is that they had that tomb sealed. The priest made Pilate put a seal on that thing. So that means they put wax over the thing so that if it moved, it would break the wax. They had Roman soldiers on guard to make sure the body wouldn't get stolen. It's weird that they thought that was going to happen. That the disciples didn't know that was going to happen, but the priests wanted to make sure. And like Dad said, that did not work out. And the story that the soldiers told, the priest tried to shut them up. Like, here's some silver. Just keep it quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me read Acts chapter 1, because there's something here as well, and it says, in my former book, Theophilus, I wrote about that Jesus began to do and to teach until the day he was taken up to heaven. And then after giving instructions through the Holy Spirit to the apostles he had chosen, after his suffering, he presented himself to them and gave many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God. On one occasion, while he was eating with them, he gave them this command: do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift that my Father promised, which you have heard me speak about. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit. So Jesus was with them for 40 days. And then he told them to wait until the Holy Spirit came. And there's a lot that can be said about that. He was like, don't evangelize until you got to wait.
Yeah. If there's one thing men are good at, it's waiting. It's what we all want to. I want to be a real good waiter.
Yes. Yes. You can. Yeah. That's right.
Another theory that they try to is the myth theory. That it was years and years had passed, and they decided to just come up with this myth of Jesus dying and resurrecting from the dead. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that theory.
I haven't.
So the problem with this one would be that the Gospels were written within 10 to 30 years after this event had taken place. And so if you think about the time it takes for a myth to get started, like it needs time to build up steam and to build up a myth. And 10 to 30 years is not enough time. And on top of that, the letters of the New Testament were written before then, they think. So it doesn't happen. And like you were reading Acts and things. Was it 20 years ago, you said, when the planes
9/11, yeah, 9/11 20 years.
happened? And so we witnessed it through a TV, but there were people who were on the ground who witnessed the event actually happen, and they'll tell you exactly what happened. And at this point, there might be embellishments coming along, but it's not enough for a myth to form up that, it was actually 10 fighter jets that ran into the plane and this happened and that. I mean, there are some crazy conspiracies out there, but...
Well, one thing we have advantage for spreading a myth or a theory or something like that is we have the ability to spread information a lot faster, whereas back then they didn't have the ability to, spread information quick. So we could form a myth in a matter of hours, you know what I'm saying, because we could get it out everywhere.
And he tells Thomas, when Dad said, "Put your hands here," see that, don't be unbelieving, but believe. And, Thomas at that point, by the way, says, "The Lord of me and the God of me," and he declares Jesus is God. And he says, "Blessed are you because you've seen, but there are those who have not seen and will believe," and that's our role, But I think, like I said at the very beginning, we could walk around with our arms folded thinking we know something about the natural world, but we really don't know anything. Jesus was the first fruit of resurrection. It's something that's going to happen to all of us who are followers of Christ. I know we talk about dying and going to heaven, but there's going to come a time where your body is going to come out of the ground. It says the sea will give up their dead, and we'll have resurrected bodies, glorified bodies like Christ did. He showed up in a room with locked doors somehow. He ascended into heaven somehow. Flesh and blood ascended into heaven, if you think about that. So I don't know what the future holds, but we have a garden at the house, and we just got our first strawberry. It was the first fruit, and Josiah and Misty ate that thing. And there isn't a strawberry left on all those plants. It was just that one popped out of nowhere. It's like, how long do we have to wait for another strawberry? And so Jesus was the first fruit of resurrection. He was the first. And now we have to wait because the time will come when resurrection will be a common thing, and we'll say, well, that's normal,
Right. I remember when CNN was really popular and you could turn it on and see the news happening around the world really quickly. And it's like, okay, the end times are coming because now you know. And now look at how things have changed. Yeah. I mean, immediately through Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, what's going on somewhere.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, y'all see this?
That's right. That's right.
Christians through the years have thought that Jesus was right around the corner. I guess right around turning of the 20th century, early 1900s. There was a lot of Christians at that time that believed Jesus isn't far in coming. He should be any time now. And of course, when Hitler came along, World War II, they thought he was the Antichrist. And
I would have thought it.
He sure looked like it for a while, I guess. But it turned out to be not so. And Jesus also said there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, and these things must come to pass. Many events have to come to pass. And, it's been a long time, and it's probably may still be a long time. But technology is moving right along fast, and a lot of things are changing. But the time will come, I think, that, he says to watch Israel, I guess. That's one thing right there. So watch the fig tree, which represents Israel. And when you see the buds starting to come out of the fig tree, it's springtime is near, and summer is also near. And, of course, the bearing of the fruit coming to the figs coming to full maturity. I think that's something we need to watch. And watch Israel. And I think that's what he tells us to do.
Yeah. But talking about, no man knows the day when he's going to come. I think we worry too much about the end times of the world when it could be the end times for us, you know what I mean? Like me, you know what I'm saying? I could not make it home or something tomorrow or something, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like we worry too much about when the world is going to end and not when our earthly existence as a person is going to end, which could be, either one of them could be either time, but.
That's true.
And Josh, I think you said before you spent some time with some friends that were Jehovah's Witness
yeah.
study, and they believe that Jesus came back reincarnated as Michael the archangel.
It's funny it's kind of a funny story with those guys, but there's a lot of other Christian groups, or they call themselves Christian groups, who believe Jesus resurrected from the dead spiritually, not physically, and so. Their story is that Jesus' body was in the tomb and God disintegrated it. It just evaporated, invisible for some reason. And then his spiritual body showed up to everybody and everything. But the problems with those theories are that he ate food, and he asked Thomas to touch him, So it was definitely physical, flesh and blood there.
Well, I think we did a good job of covering Easter.
Yeah, I think it's the greatest event in all of Christianity and all the Bible. It's the greatest event that's ever taken place. And I think every Christian should be thinking about the resurrection. And he was, like we said before, he was the first fruits, first of many, which means many people are going to be resurrected someday and come out of the graves when they hear his voice and so forth. It's something for all of us to look forward to. And but it's a great event, the resurrection, and one of the greatest things that we'll ever know about in our lifetime.
It is the strangest story how a poor man from Nazareth, who was nobody, was somebody and changed everything. Like, this event shook the world. It changed all of humanity. You can't write that, You can't make something like that up. It is huge.
So you're saying there's hope for a poor boy from Ocklawaha?
Well,
I could shake humanity.
Well,
we're a shaken world right now. How are we going to come out of it? What's your rally cry? Is it Mark 15:15? Are you going to please the crowd, or are you going to praise the risen Savior? It's like singing that song now. Daniel, I think it's a good time to go before people have to hear me sing.
yeah, I think
All right, y'all, we just want to thank you for listening to our podcast today. The Whatsoever Things podcast is just a group of folks sitting around talking about their faith, and it does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the leadership of Oxford Assembly of God. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. You can subscribe in whatever your favorite podcast application is. And if you'd like to find out more information about our church, you can visit our website at www.oxfordag.org. That's oxfordag.org. We'll see you next time.